Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to AIEC's Webinar Weeks, not just products, but solutions. You know, AIEC Webinar Weeks, we really aim to address today's industry challenges and opportunities along with solutions and tips on how to overcome them. And I think you've seen that kind of play out in the last two series. We're in series 3 now. I think this is our 38th. We're at 38th webinar. So, you know, this has been a long run, and we've really enjoyed bringing you, our associate members and our vendors. They're the ones down in the trenches. They're seeing a lot of what's going on across the board in multiple different verticals. So, we don't always like to bring you all sales pitches, right? And so when we work with our vendors and our associate members, we want them to be bringing information that's useful to you, that informs you so you can make better decisions. This webinar will be roughly 40-45 minutes. We'll leave 10 or 15 minutes towards the end for Q&A. We do ask that you please keep your microphone muted and submit those questions to the chat function. You can select the drop-down box and select AIEC. That will direct those questions to Brian and myself, and we will moderate those on your behalf to our presenter today. I don't know that do we have any PE credits today?
The 2:30 session today does.
There we go. So if you're looking to get some PE credits, we're not offering them for this particular webinar, but we do have a webinar this afternoon. If you're interested in that, go check that out and make sure you get registered for that. And Brian, who do we have speaking to us?
Our presenter today is Vaughn Williams. He is the Senior Security and GRC Assessor for InfoSight. He has 20 plus years of experience and expertise providing cybersecurity and auditing services across all sectors and industries. He specializes in assessing compliance with NIST, HIPAA, GLBA, and more. His certifications include being a certified information systems auditor, certified in risk and information systems control, certified bank cybersecurity manager, and a utility risk and resilience certificate. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Vaughn.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate y'all asking me to present on this topic of supply chain attacks. And just so we know, supply chain attacks, SolarWinds was just the beginning, is the title. Unless you've been hiding under a pile of power poles, you've been impacted by or heard about the SolarWinds breach and attack, plus the ripple effects that will be felt for years. Chances are, even if you believe you haven't, you actually have been impacted by this due to its far-reaching tentacles into not just your supply chain, but into everything supply chains. Products you buy, products your suppliers buy, and even into regulatory audits, as our government auditors will want to know how you are handling these risks. Just don't make the mistake of asking them how they are handling them. That conversation might not end too well. Also want to let you know that this presentation is not a sales pitch. I appreciate the gentleman just mentioning that. This is designed to give you knowledge about supply chain attacks and enable you to help protect your company. Personally, I'm not a fan of sitting through an hour or more of a presentation where the main thing you get out of it is you can solve your problem by hiring this. So let's cover what we'll be going over today. So for the next 4 hours, 40 minutes, sorry, didn't mean to scare you, just trying to keep you awake instead of putting you to sleep. We'll cover what a supply chain attack is, who SolarWinds is for those of you that don't already know, how the attack occurred, how it was detected, who was behind it, how SolarWinds might have prevented it, and most importantly, we'll discuss some things that your utility can do to protect itself from these type of attacks. My goal is to try to not be too techy today. If I fail and you do have a question, just remember that we'll have the Q&A at the end. So as mentioned, go ahead and enter your questions into the chat function. I know it's cliche, but it's also true. The only bad or silly question is the one that never gets asked. So while I mentioned this is not a sales presentation, however, if I want to raise down the road by keeping the boss man happy, I do need to cover what he wants me to cover. And this slide is the only salesy one in the bunch. So just bear with me for a second while I go over who we are. As you can see on the slide, we're InfoSight. We were founded in 1998 and we're headquartered in Miami, Florida. From the data center to the cloud, We architect, secure, and manage IT, OT, and ICS critical networks 24/7, 365. Our US-based SOC leverages a co-managed approach in defending your networks, keeping your systems safe and secure. We do partner with multiple cloud providers, allowing us to manage and oversee your cloud implementation and security. Plus, if you're not there yet, we can help you migrate to the cloud too. We also provide security and security awareness training for all levels of employees up to and including the board of directors. As you know, it only takes one click on a link or attachment to potentially result in a breach of your utility. And the last thing I'll mention here is that we do offer a wide array of advisory and assessment services to help ensure that your company is adhering to regulatory and industry best practices to give you that peace of mind that you're doing it right, as well as providing you with the tools to improve your security posture. So if you are interested in learning more about any of our services, just indicate that in the chat, or you can visit our URL, which you see on the bottom right of the presentation. The InfoSight team does go beyond the 26-character alphabet with all the certifications held. You can see some of them on the screen. Our team is full of members who thrive on learning and attaining new knowledge and certifications, and you can rest easy knowing that you are working with subject matter experts on every project we are engaged with. Now that I got that out of the way, you've already got a little bit of background on who I am. They did a great job of covering that for me. I appreciate that. As mentioned, I do have 20 years of experience in all the different IT controls, etc. My passion is helping businesses keep their systems and data secure. That's why I'm here presenting to you today. I want to help you keep your systems and data secure. For me to keep up with all the latest information I need, I spend a lot of time in webinars, just like you're doing today. I read a lot of security news, or I research every new trick and tactic that threat actors like to use. And I don't know if any of you do this, but when I walk through an airport, I actually cringe because of all the scary gaps I see in their IT environments. The passion of mine actually started back in AOL. The quick short story is, I'm sure many of you have experienced AOL in the past. You get to come up with your own screen name and that you've got mail. Well, every attempt at creating my own screen name resulted in, sorry, that name is taken. And after an hour of trying to come up with my own name, I was getting a little frustrated. So I banged out on the keyboard, I will get in, and hit enter. I must have missed the I, and it said, congratulations, will get in is available. The very next day in an AOL chat room, I was accused of being a hacker. I thought, that sounds interesting. So that has actually kickstarted my security career and allowed me to be here today presenting to you. So let's go ahead and jump on in and get started. We'll start with talking about what a supply chain is. Every company has a product and service that they sell or provide, such as electricity. In order to provide electricity, a series of steps has to be taken to create it and deliver it. I won't get into discussing raw materials. We could add another 20, 30 minutes to the presentation. So this series of steps, like generation, distribution, billing, all consist of putting together processes, software, devices, or other items that come from some other company or place. The sources used to obtain these things are referred to as your supply chain. In IT and technology, the supply chain is generally hardware, software products, such as computers, servers, firewalls, control panels, smart RTUs, and more. Software such as operating systems, productivity software like Word and Excel, communication software, Outlook, SMS, chats, OT software from Surveillant, OSI, or ACS. And a part of your technology supply chain would also include USBs, CDs, things of that nature. But we want this discussion to be about where you get your products from. We also want it to discuss where your suppliers get their products. So in essence, the definition of a supply chain attack is an attack against one of your suppliers or your supplier's supplier by a malicious threat actor. That threat actor could have several motives for the attack. The first one could be for a desire to disrupt the supply chain, such as the 2016 DYN cyber attack. This was an attack against the internet itself. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it effectively shut down access for hours to dozens of large companies like Amazon, Twitter, Verizon, and God forbid, Xbox Live. I couldn't play Call of Duty that entire day. I couldn't open a single in-game supply drop, and that was a supply chain attack consequence that no one talked about. But this can also occur against critical infrastructure as well. The next reason could be a desire to steal information to get a competitive edge, such as the Night Dragon attack in 2011, where petroleum companies were targeted and breached, and exploratory geodata and technology data was stolen. Imagine the amount of money at stake for the first company that discovers a new oil deposit. In one case, a formula for electrolytic fluid for capacitors was stolen. What the attacker didn't realize is that they didn't get the entire formula. They missed the last part of it. Consequently, this company produced millions of faulty capacitors used in motherboards all around the globe. Those systems all started failing around the same time, which resulted in millions of dollars of losses for Dell to replace them. Can you imagine the consequences if this happened to the capacitors used in power distribution systems? A less glamorous attack that turned into something larger occurred because of dumb luck. When someone clicked on something in an email during a massive phishing campaign, and that someone was a supply chain employee for a commercial HVAC vendor. Threat actors stayed in that HVAC company for months learning what they could access and how to monetize it. And that HVAC vendor had remote access into a major retailer, which resulted in the massive Target breach of credit card data from a few years back that is still being talked about today. So does your utility utilize HVAC vendors with remote access into your systems? And for the topic of this presentation, the reason could be to get a supplier with the goal of perpetrating attacks against the customers of that supplier. There have been some notable IT supply chain attacks, and I'll just cover a few that are actually high profile. The first is a Supermicro attack. Not to get into politics, but like the White House insurrection, depending on who you talk to, this one may or may not have occurred. The evidence I've seen and read leads me to believe it did occur. The US government, Amazon, Apple, and a whole slew of other major companies use Supermicro in their supply chains to provide servers for a host of various reasons. It turns out that for a period of 10 years, the Chinese government had infiltrated Supermicro's own supply chain in China, which is where the majority of circuit boards were made, to implant chips and code on the Supermicro motherboards. Supposedly, this has occurred to other vendors as well, which I think is very likely. These tiny little rice-sized chips establish connections back to, guess where? China. So the Defense Department supposedly identified this early on, but did not publicize it, again supposedly, because they wanted to learn how the chip and the process worked and study it. Do you think that the Department of Defense may have actually used it to feed inaccurate information back to China as well? Take the blue pill. And yes, Supermicro is in the process of moving their production out of China. So that kind of gives you an idea as to whether this really occurred. So where are your systems or the components for them produced? The second example I'm going to give is MEDOC. This attack was a Russian act of war against Ukraine using MEDOC, which is a tax preparation software that the Ukrainian government basically required companies to use to connect to government tax systems. The Russian-based group named Sandworm got into MEDOC's corporate systems and corrupted an update for their software by placing it in the now infamous malware named NotPetya. The tax software installed all of these Ukrainian companies, then downloaded this malicious update, and shortly thereafter, their computers started crashing. Because the code wasn't written correctly, it didn't stay contained in the Ukraine and started spreading globally. On a side note here, you want to make sure that your utility's incident response program has a playbook for this type of attack so that when a news alert comes out, you can actually take steps to respond and protect yourself. One major company, Maersk, which is a global shipping company, lost all domain controller data globally. Hundreds of domain controllers gone. However, due to a blackout in Ghana, one server had lost power mere hours before NotPetya struck. Their power company wasn't as reliable as y'all. So Maersk had one computer drive that essentially contained their entire existence to use to restore their global systems. So this attack on MEDOC and that software is realistically a precursor for the type of attack that occurred to SolarWinds. However, this one had a destructive purpose, not a sneaky one like the SolarWinds attack did. Even something you think of as not techie can lead to damages. At a recent global event, a researcher showed how he could send a fax through an analog phone line to an HP all-in-one printer. one like a lot of y'all might be using today to scan, fax, print, and copy. Do you have any of those hooked up in your OT environments? The fax he sent was specifically made to cause the printer to go out to the internet and download a malicious update and install it. And it actually contained the same malicious software as NotPetya. He demonstrated right there on the stage that he could control a laptop that was connected to the same network that printer was installed on. This next one is actually hot off the press. This was released 2 weeks ago by a researcher who wanted to bring attention to it so it could also be fixed. They've given it the name dependency confusion. Programming languages used to create software have a way of installing dependencies, which realistically are just smaller little programs that the larger one depends on to run. While the larger software program is being created, the little dependencies are stored in this centrally located, usually online, public repository to make it easier when you have multiple people working on a project. The software being created will also pull these dependencies from a local location when it cannot find the default public repository. So when an update runs, it looks to the public location first. When it doesn't find anything in the public location, it then looks to the local location. Where this comes into play is that when programs have been completed, the default public repositories are deactivated and turned off and therefore no longer exist. This researcher surmised that he could recreate the online public repositories and upload code to the same public online places used previously by these programs. This was easy to do because all the online repositories would use the same address, but with a different pointer, such as apple.repository or Facebook app.repository. And so what he did is he went and sought some companies' permissions, and with them, he created some scripts inside of some dependencies that he then put in these companies' public repositories. When a company's software project updated, it would first pull code from his newly created repository, and the script he created would phone home through the internet to let him know that his theory and test were successful. To use the researcher's words, the success rate was astonishing. Within minutes of releasing it, he noted that he had 35 successes for companies, with the vast majority of these companies being over 1,000 plus employees. So announcing vulnerabilities like this researcher did so that companies could be made aware and fix them, it could be sound advice. Some companies might not fix them otherwise. However, when you announce these things, it also has the unfortunate side effect of letting threat actors know, hey, here's something that we can take advantage of before they fix it. So this is now actively being exploited in the wild as malicious actors have started trying to take advantage of dependency confusion before it gets fixed. The scary thing is some companies have actually reported that this dependency design is working as designed and is not a bug. So you're going to see more supply chain issues where this has become the attack vector. Now, in honor of Alex Trebek's recent passing, let's play a quick pretend final category of Jeopardy. If anybody's watched Jeopardy the last couple of weeks, one of my favorite shows, a producer is filled in as a guest host because they've had a hard time finding anyone else worthy to replace Alex. The producer has done a great job. So today's final Jeopardy category is companies in the news. The answer is SolarWinds. You have 10 seconds to come up with the answer and your wager. Okay, 10 seconds is up. The question is, what is you've been hacked to the estimated cost of $2.6 billion? Let me apologize. That was kind of cringeworthy. Let's pretend I didn't do that. So for transparency, the SolarWinds attack is really not the beginning of supply chain attacks. Supply chain attacks have been occurring for thousands of years. It's not even the first attack against a software update process. We just covered that with MEDoc. However, this is the first attack of this complexity and scope to affect so many U.S. companies. So yes, most people will consider this attack, the SolarWinds attack, the first major supply chain attack in the IT world. And also understand, I'm not here to pick on any vendor or company. My goal is to present this example of a supply chain attack and what can be learned from it to help you keep your utility safe. Unfortunately for SolarWinds, they've become the standard face of supply chain attacks. This attack has a very wide-ranging implications that could actually be affecting some of you right now, and you don't even know it, and that's pretty scary. So who is SolarWinds? Unless you're still under that pile of power poles, you know that SolarWinds is a global company. You may not know that they have over 320,000 direct customers worldwide. Managed service providers also utilize SolarWinds for an additional 450,000 customers of their own. So to put it simply, SolarWinds is huge. They have an annual revenue of close to $1 billion. The night before the news came out, they were publicly trading and their shares had a worth of $7.32 billion. The day after the news broke about the hack, their value dropped to $4.41 billion. So literally overnight, because of this attack, SolarWinds lost 40% of their value. So if you play the stock market, right now would be a good time to buy some SolarWinds stock. On the bottom of the on-screen slide, you can see their biggest products. Chances are your utility uses one of them. If not, at minimum, a company you do business with, someone in your supply chain, uses them, and in particular, the affected Orion product. Why was Orion targeted? Most likely reason is that it's a platform used for managing basically the whole network of a system or of a client. Orion itself is in over 33,000 sites. Over 18,000 of these Orion client sites downloaded and installed the malicious update before the threat actors removed it. Were all 18,000 companies hacked? Well, technically they were open to the hackers, but did the malicious actors actually access all 18,000? No. By using DNS records and other tech methods, it appears as though the malicious actors were actually exploiting just a few dozen of them. Their main targets appear to be government agencies and very large corporations. You can bet that some infrastructure agencies were in there as well. There are some free tools out there you can use to examine your own utilities data for determining if you were affected. And in addition, there's a list of companies available as well if you do a search for them. So enough background talk. Let's talk about how the attack actually occurred. Information about this breach is obviously still coming out. And what I'm presenting today is what I've learned as of this past week when I finalized the presentation. We may not know the entire story for months, if ever. I've utilized over 80 plus sources and spent more time than I care to admit reading and learning about this. But hey, it's my passion to learn about this so that I can help companies stay safe. So let me start with a timeline on when things occurred. What we do know was that SolarWinds says that the earliest suspicious activity detected on their internal systems was on September 4th of 2019. Catch the phrase earliest suspicious activity detected. You can translate that to non-suspicious activity may have occurred earlier than that. So the initial unauthorized access time and date has not yet been determined or released as of yet. On September 12th, you can see that the test code was injected and a trial run started to see if the process worked without being detected. 2 months later, the test ended. Obviously, we know it was successful and the threat actors had evaded detection. So on February 20th of 2020, malware was injected into an Orion update and then deployed on their update server. As I mentioned, over 18,000 Orion installs downloaded the maliciously modified update, opening the door for infiltrations. Since the attack was successful, the threat actors removed the malicious update on June 4th of 2020. Why would they remove it? I would imagine because the update had been so successfully deployed on their primary targets, they didn't need to keep pushing the update out. If their access was somehow closed, they could just send out another update. In addition, I'm not sure that they were expecting or may not have been ready for so many systems to come back and say, hey, I'm ready for you to access me. They were probably overwhelmed. In addition, it could also be that the threat actors determined that their lowest risk of getting caught was to remove the malicious update. On December 12th, SolarWinds was notified by third parties that their systems had been compromised and that the malware Sunburst was on SolarWinds systems. After 2 days of scrambling, SolarWinds files an 8K with the SEC and notifies shareholders and customers of the attack. An additional 2 days later, US CERT releases their advisory to take all affected systems offline and to restore them only with a copy of the firmware and a rebuild of all affected systems. The recommendation is to not use backups, as those could have become compromised as well. Estimates are that some entities' affected systems won't be brought online for several months. So as of now, the investigation is ongoing and additional news stories are emerging almost daily. As an example, the news from yesterday, a piece of malware containing backdoor code was uploaded back in August to an online analysis site. Nothing was noted or connecting to SolarWinds at that point in time. However, some of the recent companies like FireEye was reviewing code of submitted samples and found that this particular sample submission had code that related back to the Sunburst code, and they've given it the name Sun Shuttle. So they could tie it to the SolarWinds hack. So this is still information coming out. So as mentioned, we won't know what happened for several months to a year and a half. So now we know what happened. Let's discuss how it actually happened. Microsoft is one of the many companies affected by the attack. Their own research, they believe that the activity in the SolarWinds network started through compromised user accounts as early as March of 2019. We'll discuss how they made that determination on the next section on how it was detected. A company named JetBrains, a SolarWinds supply chain product, is rumored to have been compromised and used to attack SolarWinds. This has been denied by JetBrains, but we know that denial is a river in Egypt and may not accurately reflect JetBrains' involvement. TeamCity is a JetBrains product utilized by SolarWinds as a continuous integration and continuous development server, hence the suspicion that that product could have been involved in the breach. The NSA has actually reported possible connections to actively exploited VMware vulnerabilities without actually providing any evidence. The VMware issues allow malicious attackers to access protected data and abuse what's known as federated systems, single sign-on, which uses a single token for multiple systems. This is when you use when you log into a website that uses your own computer login to give you access rather than making you enter your own different username and password. More on that coming up in a moment. In 2019, FireEye, a cybersecurity company who was also affected by this SolarWinds attack, had released tools to demonstrate how attackers could get into systems using certain methods that we'll discuss momentarily. The FireEye release, again, was intended to spur fixes for the issues before threat actors could take advantage of it. Once access was gained by the threat actor through one of those methods, or another method we'll discuss under who was responsible, various methods and abusive vulnerabilities would have allowed the threat actor to perform what's called privilege escalation, where they log in as a regular user, but they use vulnerabilities to give themselves admin rights to the network and systems. Once admin rights are granted, the threat actor can then pivot to stealing and using forged or stolen OAuth tokens. And those tokens are what makes that single sign-in work that we were just discussing. In most systems, using the stolen or forged OAuth tokens allows for bypassing multi-factor authentication. And for the sake of finishing this presentation on time, we won't discuss how those tokens actually work. So once privilege escalation is completed, the threat actor would then have been able to access many different network resources within SolarWinds. The threat actor's primary motive is unknown, whether it was dumb luck to get into SolarWinds in the first place, or an attack to steal information, or a planned attack to access more through a malicious update. If Microsoft was right and the initial access was in March, any of those reasons could be in play. If it was according to SolarWinds timeline, the attack was definitely planned out in advance. Either way, once the threat actor was ready to go, they installed malware named Sunspot on a development server, which is used to create the Orion program and updates. Sunspot's designed to monitor the commands used on that server that are used to assemble the smaller components of code into larger software packages. When the threat actors were ready, they placed the malicious files for Sunspot to add into the update when the next build command was run. Sunspot's programming was designed to notice the build command, back up the source files, replace them with the malicious files, and then add the malicious files into the build. When completed, Sunspot would then remove the malicious files and replace them with the original files. The intent obviously would be to evade detection during the next programming cycle. The threat actors would really still be in SolarWinds today if it weren't for the due diligence of a few other companies who detected intruders in their own systems. Too bad SolarWinds didn't detect it, but thank goodness there are other companies like FireEye out there with a desire to keep their systems safe with an eye out for security. FireEye announced on December 8th that they had suffered a breach and that what they call red team were stolen. Red team tools allow for penetration testing of a targeted system from a hacker's perspective. FireEye indicated that they determined there was a breach of their own systems through the monitoring of alerts from their multi-factor authentication, known as MFA. The alerts were the basis of determining the breach. They were classified as zero-level alerts, basically information-only alerts that most companies never look at. However, an employee took note that one of these informational notifications indicated that a cell phone being registered for MFA to an employee had already had a cell phone registered, and that usually doesn't happen. This raised his suspicions that enough so he called the employee that had the second cell phone registered and questioned him about it. The employee had no knowledge of it, and it became apparent that compromised account credentials had allowed that to occur. A FireEye internal investigation followed, and after reviewing all of their systems and over 50,000 lines of code, FireEye determined that SolarWinds was the cause of the breach. At the same time that this was occurring, Microsoft was actually conducting their own investigation. Microsoft, being as big as they are, detected their own indicators of compromise. They had internal settings limiting their authentication token life to just 1 hour. Microsoft systems flagged tokens that were used past their expiration time. Microsoft systems also flagged tokens and certificates that were assigned to Office 365 accounts that already had tokens and certificates assigned to them. Impossible logins were also detected, logins that are referred to as impossible travel logins. It's not uncommon for accounts like Netflix, Facebook, and others to allow multiple logins using the same credentials. How many of you guys share your own Netflix account? Most don't look for the physical distance between logins. Fewer still disallow it. Good corporate account policy is to at least limit corporate accounts to concurrent logins within the same facility. Microsoft's alerting detected that the physical distance between logins made it impossible for the same person to have been responsible for both logins. So when Microsoft put 2 plus 2 plus 2 together, it equaled SolarWinds. So just as an FYI, over the last few days, Microsoft has alerted everybody that there's a current Exchange server attack going on that can actually be infiltrated using these type of abilities. I bring this up today as Microsoft denies that this is related to the SolarWinds issue. So when you're done with this presentation, you might want to check with your IT admins about this free tool that Microsoft has released to verify that your Exchange servers have not been compromised. So now we know how SolarWinds was hacked and how 2 companies detected it. Let's talk about who was behind it. With this section, unless they actually come out and say it was them, there's no definitive proof of who was actually behind it, but all signs point to APT29, aka Cozy Bear, also known as Office Monkeys, Cozy Car, and the Dukes. A lot of people in the security world believe that this is a Russian government state-sponsored entity. Some of their most well-known activities include the Pentagon email attack of 2015. You might remember the DNC email issue that plagued the beginning of Trump's presidency. Yep, APT29. Fancy Bear was there towards the end, but Cozy was the one that got it started. They're also responsible for the COVID-19 research and vaccination data that was targeted and successfully infiltrated last year. And currently in the news is the French government's announcement of their own supply chain attack that was targeting France's internet service providers. This one's still developing and just may be supply chain on the brain and might just be due to vulnerabilities in a piece of software that was left unpatched. And then, of course, you have SolarWinds. Now, one of the primary methods that researchers tie attacks to certain groups is through the methods that they utilize. Certain groups like to use the same methods over and over and over again that they're experts at. In addition, the code they use contains little snippets that tie it to them. We're only going to talk about APT29's primary weapon, and that is spear phishing attacks targeting credentials. Threat actors don't have the burden of hurrying up and getting it done. They have months and years to learn about who they want to target and what tactics are likely to work. While spear phishing is their weapon of choice, they will attempt to compromise credentials through password spraying techniques. If you're not familiar with that term, that is where they will utilize a list of common or breached passwords against a targeted username. Think about your own password. Is it an easy one? In addition, they try brute forcing passwords, which works for simple passwords. And a question for you to think about. Have you used your own browser security to check your passwords? Most password management systems now have the ability to tell you if the same password you use was also used by someone else that has been breached in the past. I'd recommend using it to check yours out. So if we know who it is, why hasn't the US government shut them down? That's a legit question, and the answer is, how do we know they haven't? There's a war going on that we don't see or know about. They're hacking us, we're hacking them. There are government interactions going on that we will never be privy to. If one person or group gets taken down, next man up. There's never going to be a shortage of up and coming hackers. It's always going to be a back and forth battle. So all of this information is fine and dandy, but really, how could SolarWinds have protected themselves from these threat actors? The simple answer is through their IT stack and their governance, risk, and compliance stack. So overview and insight of risk and password policies. If I were in charge at SolarWinds, I would start here. Somewhere along the lines, there were failures here. In some circles, SolarWinds has had the reputation and history of lax security standards. As of me actually writing this presentation, you can find a developer's FTP username and password on a GitHub public repository. And just 2 weeks ago, testifying before a House Oversight and Homeland Security Committee, the now former, as it should be, SolarWinds CEO Kevin Thompson reported that an intern was responsible for violating password policies and using and posting the insecure password of SolarWinds 123, all lowercase. I'd like to know how an intern can violate password policies like that. Were there not controls in place to enforce password complexity? I'm sure you guys get a prompt on your computer when you change a password and it's too short or doesn't contain the right amount of characters. You most likely do get that prompt and can't use that password. Granted, not many controls can keep an intern from publicizing a password. However, if password complexity is not enforced in this case, how much easier is it to conduct an attack? When an unenforced password policy like this exists, there are likely hundreds of violations throughout SolarWinds' entire organization. Remember how cozy APT29 likes to attack? Phishing, spraying, brute forcing? SolarWinds made it easy peasy for them to go through and own their systems. Does your utility sacrifice security to achieve business goals? So start with the top and work your way down through the risk and ensure that you have your bases covered. So security awareness training. Obviously, if phishing were the primary reason for the success of the attack, security awareness training might have helped to prevent it. Does your utility do security awareness training? Vulnerability and penetration testing might have uncovered open ports and issues before it became an issue. Next-gen firewalls and gateway AV might have shown activity and alerts from unusual locations, or even heuristics might have revealed unusual code. Multi-factor authentication for all users. In the past, it's just been assigned to privileged users, but because of privilege escalation, if you can get access as a regular user, you can then become an admin. So we recommend multi-factor authentication for all users. If they can't get in to begin with, then they can't elevate privileges and use stolen or forged tokens. SIEM, System and Information Event Management Systems. When you have a system that can correlate a new cell phone being added with access being granted from a new location like another country, it allows attacks and indicators of compromise to be detected and thwarted before they become a problem. And it is important that utilities share information on any potential or active threats that they find. If you don't have a SIM, your utility should at least be putting eyes on your security alerts and systems, both OT and IT. Note here that this is what FireEye did that allowed them to catch it. SOC, Security Operations Center. What might you catch in real time if you used an operations center and had eyes on glass 24/7, 365? a lot more than you would by only reviewing your critical and high alerts on a monthly basis. Segmentation of your network can be used to thwart actors from traveling between sensitive systems. Using this, you can stymie an attack or at least prolong it enough to catch it via indicators of compromise. You can use this for PCI DSS to keep non-essential systems out of scope of PCI DSS reviews. And the last item on this list, if there was a final review of the compiled update after the build and before release, it might have been caught as well. If any one of these or a combination of a few of them, it would have prevented SolarWinds from getting attacked or allowed them to at least catch it. So what can your utility do to protect itself from this supply chain attack? Today, you need to determine if your utility utilizes SolarWinds Orion. If you do, I recommend that you immediately seek third-party assistance to determine if and how you might be impacted. In addition, you need to determine if any of your vendors, your supply chain, utilize Orion. If they do, you will also need to protect yourself. You'll want to find out if the vendor has remote access into your system and figure out what controls you have in place for that. Does your system receive updates from a vendor? Look at your company's patching policy to determine if updates are applied automatically or go through a vetting process to determine any issues before it becomes an issue. Does your vendor store or have access to any of your confidential or customer data? If they do, then you will want to look at their access and verify with them what they do and have done to secure your data. Once you've gone through the process of verifying if you or your vendors have Orion, you will want to immediately pivot to your Microsoft 365 security. You need to have your 365 security and compliance setter settings and logs reviewed for indicators of compromise. Are there any suspicious logins outside of normal times or locations? While in there, ensure that you have rules and notifications set up for those type of things. CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, released a tool called Sparrow to help you determine if any of your Microsoft accounts or apps have been compromised. There are also third-party utilities and tools that you can use to check the security of your environment. If you have internet filtering logs, you can review them and search for AVSVM Cloud and reyweb.com, REYweb.com, from the beginning of 2000 through today, as these are domains that were used by the threat actors to carry out the attack. The reyweb was found and reported as of the new Sun Shuttle issue I just mentioned as of yesterday. So we've talked about what you should do today. What should you do going forward? You must understand there's no single solution that can be employed to stop these kind of attacks. It's a multi-layered approach, and that requires the entire organization to be involved, starting with senior management and the board. Your utility should maintain a top-down, all-hands-on-deck mentality. We've all heard that before. However, it's like planting a seed in fertile soil. If the soil's hard, like when things are not actually affecting you or could affect you, the seed may not grow. When things like this SolarWinds hack occurs, it kind of tills up the security soil and upper management and allows seeds to be planted that can germinate and sprout that might not grow otherwise. Use this as an opportunity to have those security conversations that have fallen flat in the past. Have frank conversations about your risk and the utility's ability to protect itself. There's no time to get things done like when management is ready to spend to protect themselves. And lastly, with senior management and the board, have the mindset that you have to prove that you are safe. Don't just assume you are because you have everything in place. You need to test and verify that everything is working as it's intended. Social engineering test, pen testing, web app testing, etc. So going forward, you want to make sure that you implement or have a framework such as NIST CSF. That stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework. In implementing NIST CSF, you want to determine what your current maturity levels are. In other words, how good they are for each of the CSF subcategories. Management has to decide what the desired levels are or how good they want them to be. And then you have to develop a plan of actions and milestones to ensure that you're making progress towards making them better. In addition, you really should have an unbiased second set of eyes reviewing your security practices. It's the job of people such as myself to help protect their clients by performing a gap analysis or other services such as vulnerability testing and pen testing services. In case you're wondering, the difference between vulnerability And pen testing, vulnerability just shows you what vulnerabilities are there in your system that threat actors can take advantage of. Pen testing actually lets you know if they are available to be taken over. So let's talk about vendor management for a second. What does your utility do to vet its potential vendors? What qualifications are they required to have? You want to look at vendors and assess the risk to your systems if that vendor is breached. You want to review the vendor security controls. Don't be shy about it either. Your utility security is on the line here. Be frank and ask the vendors for it. Ask for their SSA E16, SOC reports, policies, and programs. Ask them for any information related to their vendor management program and how they manage your fourth-party risk. What does your vendor do for their business continuity and disaster recovery program? Is it as robust as yours? You want to look at what regulatory requirements the vendor may have to comply with. Become familiar with it. Contractual review. You want to ensure that you and your vendor, that the contract covers requirements and stipulations to notify you when they have a breach. Some companies like to stick it in an 8K regulatory SEC filings that few people ever review and consider that notification. What cyber insurance coverage does a vendor carry? What security requirements are stipulated in your contract, as well as what service level agreements must be met? And you need to ascertain where you rank on the vendor's list of clients. Will they work with you first or you last? That affects where you rank in their BCP discussions. That should all be spelled out. And lastly, you can require your vendors get their products from a reputable source. I worked in the bank a few years back. Their IT guys bought stuff secondhand, refurbished from unknown shops in China. What are the chances that those could have been affected? And finally, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What you expect from your supply chain and your vendors will help your utility to protect itself. You're going to see some of the same items on this list that we've already covered, but in a different order. Initially, you want to do vulnerability and penetration testing first, because you need to make sure that your systems cannot be attacked today. Don't think it's a one and done. It should occur regularly, at minimum one time a year. MFA, we've talked about locking it down for all users. You want to make sure that you have a high quality firewall and with gateway and AV controls built in. Segment your network as much as possible. Go through your GRC stack and ensure your controls and training policies and risk assessments are up to date, and have a cybersecurity gap analysis conducted. You want to make sure that you don't have passwords like electric123. And finally, if you can, follow up with the rest of these items: SIM, eyes on glass, review of alerts. You have to understand it's not possible to prevent your utility from being attacked. An attack will occur. How do you survive a bear attack when you and your buddy are out in the wild? When a bear starts to charge you, run faster than your buddy. Same applies to protecting yourself. Let the hackers have easy prey while you make it harder to get into your systems. Everything being equal, attackers will go after the easiest available targets. Do what you can to protect yourself, short of tripping your buddy so the bear eats him first. So, conclusions, to go over some things for you guys to take back today. Every company has a supply chain, and an attack could happen to anyone. Your utility is responsible for your utility security. Don't rely on your suppliers. SolarWinds could have prevented it. At minimum, they should have detected it. Today, you need to determine if your company has been affected. Your company can take steps to protect itself today. Remember that there is no single solution. You want to work with management to ensure an all hands-on-deck approach, top-down. Utilize a third-party review for a fresh set of eyes. You can implement a SOC with eyes on glass. Vendor management is important, and fourth-party management is just as important. And lastly, don't be afraid to challenge your vendors on providing information. So with that being said, you can visit us on the internet to learn more about us and our services, and it's time for doing some Q&A.
Thanks, Vaughn. We have had a few questions come in, and just a reminder, if you do have any questions for Vaughn, please use the chat function and send those to us, and we'll moderate the questions to Vaughn. The first question that we do have is, We're not very big with a ton of resources. Can a vendor help us manage vendors?
And the answer to that is yes. You can utilize a vendor as long as you vet your vendor out. And, to begin with, there are several companies out there that actually have vendor management tools. And there are some that actually utilize a collection of electric co-op utilities to have a vendor database so that you don't have to do all the homework on your vendors. They actually have that in their database and share that with all of the co-ops that use that database. And it's very inexpensive.
Thank you. Another question that came in, when you talk about multi-factor authentication, is there one type of product that is better than others?
That's a good question. Now, hackers will tell you that all multi-factor authentication can be hacked, but the primary issues are the two different types of multi-factor authentication. You have text message authentication, and then you have app on your phone that gives you a security code on the phone authentication. Stay away from the text message and SMS-based ones. They are not as secure and can be taken over more easily than can the app-based authentication systems.
The next question, if phishing and passwords are the primary ways that hackers get into systems, why do you recommend vulnerability testing first?
Ooh, see, that's a great question. With passwords and multi-factor authentication, that takes a little bit of work from a hacker to actually perform. With vulnerability testing and pen testing, that's something that can be done and eliminate any openings that you have today in your network that's allowing hackers to access stuff today. So it really is most important to have the vulnerability / pen testing done to ensure that there's no immediate way for them to get into your systems.
All right, the last question that we have is, how can we find out if hackers are in our systems today?
And that is probably the toughest question. There are a lot of third-party utilities and tools that have been released because of the SolarWinds attack. If you just look up SolarWinds and just do a quick Google search on SolarWinds and methods of finding indicators of compromise, you will see some free utilities there that you can utilize to actually perform some checks in your systems. In addition, not to point you to third parties, but third parties can also come in and do a look and see what's in your system currently. It's common that antivirus programs and stuff won't pick up a lot of these types of malware and things that are in your system, because once an attacker gets in, they will adjust those programs to not notify when they find something suspicious. So you definitely should have some utilities to run. And if you don't have expertise on staff for the area, definitely seek a third party to come in and do some work for you to ensure that you don't have hackers in your system today.
Well, Vaughn, that's all the questions we have. We want to thank you for presenting for us today. It's very informational. I know as these types of attacks get more and more sophisticated, it just puts more pressure on our IT and security staff to make sure they're abreast of what's going on and how to look for the different types of attack methods that we're seeing. So excellent information. I see you've got your contact information up there for those of you that would like to reach out to Vaughn for some more information.
Absolutely.
Or maybe learn a little bit more about InfoSight. That information is right there available to you. And as always, you can reach out to Brian and myself or Ashley, and we can get you in touch with Vaughn or InfoSight at any time. So again, Vaughn, thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me present today. I appreciate it.
All right, coming up at let's see, 1 o'clock, we have our third webinar for today, the wireless troubleshooting techniques. Stick around for that. And then I also want to put a quick plug in here. In this last series of webinars, we tried to pepper in some content from AIEC. This morning we heard from Amber and Thad on the IRE program, and we've got a treat coming up, not today, but in a future webinar in this third series. Paul Dow is going to be presenting. And for those of you that don't know who Paul is our videographer here at AIEC, and he does a wonderful job putting promotional material together, just telling the cooperative story. Paul has worked a lot with NRECA and just across the board. I know he's got some history working with the Rams and doing some really fun stuff like that. But he's going to be talking specifically on live streaming your virtual annual meeting. So I know, a lot of our membership have postponed or tried to do some sort of hybrid virtual annual meeting. Paul's been working on a solution, so I think you'll want to stay tuned for that and tune in and hear what he's got to say. I think he's got a really good solution. Also, Chris Reynolds, our manager of Energized Graphics, will be presenting, I believe, on our last day of this third series, and he's going to be talking a little bit about what Energized Graphics has to offer, and you'll want to stay tuned for that. So if you haven't gone out and you haven't registered for those, please do. We appreciate the support in that, and look forward to seeing you. So with that, again, Vaughn, thank you so much for presenting for us today. We really appreciate it. And that concludes our second webinar for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vaughn.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.